I'm going to probably move about a little bit. Okay, so yeah, we're part of Rapid7 now. In May, they acquired NT Objectives. We've been building a tool called NTO Spider, which is now App Spider. And as mentioned, I've been doing appsec for a good 15 years now. And that's just pretty much all I do, is appsec all day. What this talk is really going to be about is just kind of an overview of where we are at with the existing test apps, kind of the new challenges that we see with the way apps are developed these days, and then we'll talk a little bit about Hackazon and what that actually is. But we're going to start off with the existing test apps. There are plenty of them. If you look at you know, the standard lists out there, you know, we've got the comic kind of is goes kind of across all open source development, right? It's like we all have to kind of create new versions, and there was actually a new one. We started Hackazon a little over a year ago, and then I saw that what is it called? Benchmark is the new OWASP one that popped up. It's pretty much like WaveSep, but there's a list of them. And the OWASP list is probably one of the best lists out there. You know, there's a collection of offline apps as well as online apps. So this is ones that are hosted, right? So there's the offline, and then actually this is online. Do they both say offline? Yeah, they do. So there's quite a number of them, and you're not going to be able to read them on this screen. But you can go to the website, owasp.com or owasp.org. You'll see it. And there's a ton of them. And there are very handy like ISOs that you can install that have a bunch of them pre-installed and set up and very useful. I think we're now on the list. I think Hackazon's finally on there. One of the things that we see with all of these apps is that they are really built for different purposes. Like WebGoat was really built as a teaching tool. It kind of walks you through learning how to hack a web app. And that's really its design. It's not really useful for testing like automated scanners because it's not really built that way, but it's great for teaching. Damn Vulnerable Web App really is a decent test app, but I think it's more popular because of its name than anything else. But it's actually pretty useful. Hack Me Bank, Casino, Books, those are all, the old Foundstone team built those. Actually, I think we were building those when I was still there. But those are all written in various languages. They're all old school looking apps. They look like stuff that was built in the 90s, right? These are all very good tools. Each of them have very good uses. WaveSep was built for Shay Chen's testing that he was doing. He did I forget what he called it. Do you remember the name of this? Shay Chen's test. He kind of compared all the scanners against each other, which was a very nice project, heck of an amount of work. To build that, he had to build a tool that he could run or a web app that he could run all the scanners against to see which ones would find which vulns. But it's a very simplistic looking app. It looks like, you know, standard Web 1.0 stuff. There's very little JavaScript, no AJAX. It's just kind of a very flat app. It's like if you get to this page and you find that, you know, your attack payload finds the vuln, then great. But it's not really testing the ability to crawl and navigate through these applications. Wivit was kind of intended to test that, to test the crawling capabilities, and it's kind of like a JavaScript gauntlet, if you will. And it's very useful, but it's very easy to cheat on that one, which was the bummer. It's basically if you get to the page, then it records that you got there, and then you get credit for it, right? So anybody building a tool could just see, oh, Wivit, bam, I'll just find this. I actually contributed back to the project some code that actually will randomize those endpoint names so that it's a lot harder to cheat. But anyway, the point of each of these are very isolated. They're very useful tools. They're good for what they're doing. But they are limited because they're really designed around classic web. They're really designed around the old style of development. There's no real dynamic nature to these applications like we see in the apps that we have to test. Right? Developers are building much more dynamic applications, and there's a lot of new content. There's a lot of AJAX activity going on with apps, REST interfaces, and we don't see that in these test apps. So it really limits our ability for people to test tools and see how the quality of a tool, but even to learn, like to practice against a vulnerable app and against these environments, right? So there's a lot of limitations that I see. So let's talk a little bit about that changing landscape and what it actually looks like, right? We're all used to the classic, HTTP request. We should be. It is a little scary sometimes. I run into environments, especially web developers, and that web developers have never even seen their HTTP traffic, which is insane. But we're used to the kind of the classic model. This is the old name and value pair structure of standard get and post. That's what we'd been doing for a long, long time. That's how all the tools were really built, was around this model. So all of your pen testing tools are very comfortable with this. But as we've kind of moved forward, the tools being able to attack this is very easy, very simple model to plug in attacking the value and seeing if it worked. But what we see is that works. These tools that are built around that are good. They can crawl that application. They can go through that, find all the links, find the forms, understand how to crawl them, and kind of, and then inject the attack payloads. It's kind of how a classic web scanner works. All the tools are doing that. What we see is that the landscape has been changing dramatically. There's no longer just these flat HTML files. You've got a lot of dynamic content, a lot of AJAX activity. AJAX really causes crawling to be a nightmare. Automated discovery of what's on your application, because it's kind of analogous to that the maze in the Labyrinth movie, where as you're navigating through it, it's changing and it's moving, and that's kind of, crawling AJAX can be a real difficult thing. And so seeing that in live applications and not being able to find vulns in there becomes a real problem. Part of it is that, it's not just HTML based, it's not just the dynamic nature. Those AJAX apps work that way because they're turning around and making RESTful calls to the back end and getting new content and then changing what they're showing. So the page isn't necessarily reloading on a new URL. It's just going and getting something and then bringing it back. And you have to be able to handle the format. You have to handle that communication when you're understanding, when you're starting to attack these apps. And you got to see what's going on. Even if you're manually doing pen testing, you have to get comfortable with all of this. What we see a lot of it is REST. We hear REST all the time. REST is not a standard. It's really kind of a way. It's it's a style. JSON is one of the very popular RESTful formats that we'll get into the most, but you could see REST in a lot of different ways. We could see it kind of on the URL structure, like on top. You could see XML, JSON. We used to see some AMF from Flash and Flex apps, but those are kind of waning. Google Web Toolkit. There's a lot of different formats that we'll see the data in. And so as testers, as people that need to use tools, you have to make sure that you are comfortable with all these different formats. And there's also mixes. REST will mix things up. Sometimes you'll send XML and get CSVs back, right? The developer building that REST API is doing whatever the hell they want. They could do, input could be different from output. I'll see standard gets returning JSON. That's pretty classic. We'll see that probably the most. We'll see, Google Web Toolkit has like this pipe delimited format that it sends, and it gets kind of back a JSON-esque format that we see. But there's a lot of these different formats. JSON, again, being the most popular. JSON, for those that don't know, was really designed for JavaScript. And it's a lightweight format, so it's not as noisy as XML, where you have to have end tags. So simple JSONs that we see, like here, this one's actually a get parameter with a JSON string, so input equals then a JSON string. You could see it on the post data. We'll see a lot of these very simplistic versions, and a lot of times people think, oh, well, I could take something like this simple example, and I can kind of mentally convert those name and value, the JSON into name and value pairs. And we see a lot of tools actually try to do that. I've seen some like commercial scanners actually try to do this, where they'll take a very simple JSON string and convert it internally into name and value pairs, because that's how the whole tool was built, right? Is on that flat model. The problem is that sometimes they'll try to then deliver an attack and then convert back into JSON, and they don't understand the format properly. So then they fail. And so like this one here is missing quotes around the shirt, single quote, one or one. So it actually wouldn't work. The JSON parser would throw it out because it's not going to parse. So what we see is we need tools that can actually convert it properly, because JSON isn't just simple. It's not just usually used for that model. If you're using JSON, it's because you have complex data to be dealing with. One of the nice features with JSON is that it does support complex data structures. So you have lists and lists, and you're passing these things in, and it's very nice. So like XML, right? You can have nested data. So when you start dealing with that model of kind of converting breaks down, and what we see with a lot of the tools out there is that they don't know what to do anymore. They don't know how to parse this whole thing. It's not simple. And so then they'll just like deliver their attack payload at the end of the string or something, because they'll just take it as one big blob of text. And then the attack is useless because it's being delivered, after the parser is basically done. You want to be able to make sure that your tools can, and yourself, as you're pen testing, can dig in deeper and say, okay, I need to look at each individual parameter within this very large data set and attack each one of these parameters individually. These are things that you need your tools to do. This is the sort of thing that we've done with ours, with AppSpiders. We can handle all this sort of thing. We can handle these different formats and understand those complex data structures. There are some other oddities, and this isn't just JSON. You could do this to even AMF, which again isn't used as much. But with AMF, it's actually like objects that are being passed. So it looks like binary. And so you'll see this from time to time in various apps, various services that you're doing, especially as you're dealing with REST interfaces that are used by thick clients in some cases. You have some gaming companies that have their own custom formats that they're using. It's still all going over HTTP, but the data set's different. And so you need to make sure your tools can parse those and analyze them. And so when you get into some of those weird custom situations, which I don't want to get into too deeply here, okay? So let's talk a little bit about Hackazon and how this kind of starts playing into these environments and what it offers. As I mentioned, Hackazon is a modern-looking vulnerable test app. It looks like an e-commerce site, so that's why it's Hackazon, right? So it looks like a little online storefront. It's got lots of little elements all over the place. It uses very modern, client frameworks to kind of give it a modern look and feel. It's pretty easy to install. It runs on PHP, so a simple LAMP stack works. It also has a mobile companion client because it has REST APIs to it. It has some that it's using for the AJAX activity, but it also has just a standard API, and we built a mobile client that goes along with it that lets you see traffic going to that API. And that API has vulnerabilities as well. So you can see how that actually works. I do a lot of mobile testing, and to me, there's a lot of people building tools to test the mobile clients. And for the most part, those mobile endpoints aren't that interesting. And I don't really want to attack that way because I don't want to have to deal with attacking individual people. That's too hard. If I learn what API calls this mobile app is making, and I can go target that back end, that's where all the data is at. That's the gold. So that's what I want to practice testing against. And that's what I haven't really seen a lot of environments for people to practice. But you can practice against Hackazon. So like I said, it runs on a simple LAMP stack. We have it hosted as well. So if you just want to go to this URL, you can actually see the app and start playing with it yourself. We reset it on a pretty regular basis because it gets destroyed. And you can download the APK. It's all available on GitHub as well. That's an open source project. We're looking for contributors. but we've been kind of just keep going. We're building into it. It's pretty simple to set up, pretty simple to get going. It's got a nice little config wizard, like an installation wizard that kind of gets your database set up, just like any other app generally. Like I said, the features, it has a standard, some HTML, some standard HTML, but it has some AJAX activity, mostly XML and JSON. There are portions with the Google Web Toolkit libraries. So we've kind of scattered different technologies. So pieces of it are using jQuery, some of it's using Google Web Toolkit. We actually have Flash and AMF going on there, where you enter your coupon code. It's actually a little Flash applet that runs. And you enter your coupon code, and of course that's using AMF, and you can start stealing coupon codes through that. It also has strict workflows and sequences, which I'm going to talk about here. And the vulnerabilities are also configurable, which is kind of interesting. So you can actually, if you were to set up a classroom environment, or you were testing tools, you can actually enable or disable, however you want to look at it, different vulnerabilities on each install. So we've used it in some training sessions, and it's really fun. We'll enable a few vulns on each system that are different, and tell them, go try to find them. So they can't be like, hey, where'd you find this? Because everybody's is different, right? But we've made it configurable, in part also so that if you're using it to test tools, so if you're using it to test an automated scanner, if you're not using Google Web Toolkit, turn off the vulns there, because those don't matter to you anymore, right? It gives you some flexibility to play with it that way. So let's go back here to the strict workflows for a second, because this is another interesting feature that we don't really see with most of the other tools, but that we see in real life that pen testers worry about and deal with, but automated tools also need to deal with. And that is these application workflows. What I talk about here, and I'll use the shopping cart example, this is what we have on Hackazon, is that there is often a process you go through to get through a transaction, right? So in this case, you add an item to the cart, you view your cart, you hit checkout, you give your shipping info, your billing info, you confirm your order, and you get a receipt. Pretty standard, right? That's pretty normal. The problem is that most tools out there, and some silly pen testers, will just start attacking in the middle of that effort. So they may just start delivering attacks against the shipping information page, but they haven't added anything to their cart, right? Or whatever training they did before is complete, because they got to the end, they got a receipt, their cart's empty again. So they're no longer doing a useful attack because the application's going to complain. So you got no items in your cart, go away, or they'll just redirect them back to the front page. But they don't belong there. The session state doesn't accept them. So you really have to, if you want to attack step 4, you need to set it up. You need to do a clean step 1, 2, 3. Then I can deliver an attack against step 4, and I might see my vuln. A lot of times that'll work. Sometimes we're still going to miss something, because in many instances, you're not going to see a vuln immediately. You're not going to immediately see, the results of that attack. It may not show up until you get to the very end, right? Maybe after you confirm your order is actually when it's going to store the data into the database. Prior to that, it was all in session state data, right? Now all of a sudden we see the vuln. Well, if you don't connect all those dots, you're going to miss things, right? And so both human pen testing and automated tools need to process this. With our tool, we actually do have the ability to test this. So you can actually, it'll say, I'm going to do step 1, 2, 3, deliver an attack, and then follow through. Sometimes we'll see it this way. Sometimes you'll see it like cross-site scripting might work on, it might reappear on the confirmation screen, because that's where it's printing everything back to you. But we have this kind of workflow in Hackazon. So as you're going through the shopping cart, certain attacks only work properly. They'll only work if you do the attack properly, right? Because they're only not validating, or they're, the data is only going to the database at the confirms thing. It actually is implemented that way, because that's stuff I've seen in real life, right? A lot of what Hackazon is intended to be is just replications of real life problem scenarios. So it goes all the way through. Like I said, it's configurable, so you can kind of go and pick and choose which attacks you want to enable. Getting into a little bit of the weeds, I don't know, looks like the next slide's a little messed up. But it has different attacks. Getting into the weeds a little bit, you can kind of, right now it's done through config files, like enabling and disabling. One of our developers is building a little tool that'll make it very easy to kind of like randomize as well. But you can kind of go in there and decide what's going to be vulnerable and what's not. So like this one here, we hadn't said the contact name is vulnerable, and so you'll end up seeing, you know, when you attack the contact name, it'll be vulnerable. Some of them also give you the ability to pick which attacks. So you can decide if it's cross-site scripting, or, you know, and if it's going to be like persistent cross-site scripting. So we're going to save this data, and then you'll see that later. We're doing that for like the product review system. So when you review one of the products in there, you know, again, it's kind of like an Amazon, right? So you review a product, that'll stay persistent for a period of time. And so then you can see that it's persistent. And the way we have it here, and no tool, including ours, is really good at finding that I made it persistent, and I also made it persistent for other people. But we've implemented those kind of features in there. So you can really do that. Now, of course, that means once you hack it, right, it's messed up. So somebody's got to go back and clear out those comments or those product reviews. But whatever, it's a cron job. We have anti-CSRF stuff, so if you're trying to figure out how you're dealing with, you know, cross-site request forgery protection, we have some config options for that. So especially if you're adding new features to Hackazon, it's kind of got a built-in mechanism for doing that and kind of providing a token. We're trying to put in a bunch of different CSRF solutions, right? People solve it in different ways. So we're making that configurable. Yeah, so you do the token, and then it becomes configurable, right? So if that's going to be protected or not. But the whole thing is very, very flexible to allow people to modify their install in different ways. You know, we're looking for additional ideas and contributions to this. We are also, I wanted to show it to you a little bit. I have it up and running. We'll see how this goes. But I'm going to actually exit this. So this is Hackazon here. And you can see if I'm actually stay online here. Oh yeah, so it works. Okay. Yeah, so like this one here is kind of, I think this is pretty standard. Let me see if I change the prices. Yeah, so it didn't reload. So this is kind of some AJAX activity here. I've got burp up and running, and if I scroll down, you can see those my searches. So this is actually responding back with some HTML. So pretty standard, you know, this is a get. It's actually giving HTML, which I think it doc writes or whatever. But this is pretty straightforward. One of the things I want to look at here is the mobile app. So earlier I had installed it. There's the APK installed. Looks like burp is frozen. There we go. So it did authentication where it actually logged in with some basic auth creds. It got back a token in JSON, right? These are kind of things that we see in real life that we really haven't had with test apps. But we see this stuff. So the mobile client here, I actually have an emulator running. So we can see the mobile client and click on a product. It'll drill in and using the API to get some data about that. Let me go down and see that request here. Here we go. So let me see, what was this format? So this actually was a URL structured API call, right? So it's using it like directory structure. And then the response back is JSON, right? But you can see all this type of activity, again, using this mobile client, and then you can go in and start attacking, right? Can I attack, so you go back to this burp. I take this into repeater. And I don't know, what happens if I'll just put a single quote here. And then go. So I got error, okay, error not found. All right, so this is spit back, actually it should spit back some JSON, but it's actually spitting back some full HTML page. What happens if I put the quote before? I can't really see it from here. Am I after the 2 right now? Oh, yeah, okay. So let me try. Yeah, so this isn't really working there. Let me try one of the other ones. So I'll go back. Oh, actually, I should have added it to the cart. Ah. There we go. All right, add to the cart. Go to my cart. So I can see all my items here. Proceed to checkout. So you can go through this whole thing, right? It goes through the whole process of putting in your credit card information and all that stuff. But it's very nice because you can kind of go through this whole thing and actually see the traffic. You can actually see where the mobile app is not sending all the time. Sometimes it's just recording the data internally, and then when you get to a certain point, then it sends everything. And you'll see this kind of behavior as you're kind of going through it with the, and I'll set this up with, usually with burp proxy is the easiest way to do it. So I can actually see what's going on. Yeah, here's the proxy. And here's all my information, customer address. So it's pulling up stuff as I'm going through my cart and product. But you get actually an opportunity to dig in and test with apps like this, which I haven't really seen with any other tool, is that it gives you the ability to really see in an environment that looks kind of like a real app, these vulnerable models, and really start testing with it. And that's really the point of Hackazon. It's still, like I said, it's an open source project, so we're looking for contributions. We're looking for ways to continue to improve it. We've seen other products come up, like Benchmark just came out, which is a pretty interesting project. Benchmark is intended to be scanned by all the various tools out there, and one of the guys from, wasn't Contrast, what's the Aspect, right? It was the parent company of Contractor, wherever this Contrast spun off for him. Was it Dave Weiner? He's getting a lot of criticism for his app because it's coming from a vendor, and of course Contrast does very well on it. And I don't want to put any. I don't like to get into motives. I don't know that his motives are bad. Having talked with them, I see these projects as very useful to the community, because even that one, even though I don't like it in the sense that it's all classic HTML, doesn't really test what a modern scanner should do or what modern tools should be helping you with. It's important that we have these kind of tools out there so that we can compare. It's very hard for people to compare tools against each other. And so I think that kind of putting it out there, I worked closely with Larry Sudo when he did his reports in like 2010. And everybody comes out to attack. Like I know there's been a lot of attacks against Dave for his. And ultimately, we need these type of apps, we need vulnerable apps to help people see what's going on, to compare their tools, compare their own processes, right? You start to realize very quickly how little some of your tools do in a lot of cases, right? When you're dealing with these REST APIs, it is very difficult. Even with a lot of tools that can test, we see some like, where you have to, like all these API calls, these REST API calls, a lot of tools, even if you were to record the traffic and feed them in, if they can't support JSON, if they can't support the Google Web Toolkit formats, they're not going to do anything useful for you. So those tools become useless as your apps evolve, right? If they're not keeping up with that evolution. We've been actually kind of working with a lot of customers on things like Swagger, because REST APIs are becoming bigger. I don't know, how many of you are building or testing REST APIs on a regular basis? So is it like all manual effort, right? The actual, like if you're doing security testing, it's all manual, isn't it? Or do anybody have any tools they're using that are effective besides manually doing it with burp? No? That's a problem, right? For us as an industry, if we can't test these things. One of the things that we're pushing for very heavily is for more and more people to document their APIs in a format like Swagger or API Blueprint, because that's where we're really, I think, going to start having solutions. And we're building solutions in our tool so that we can automatically consume a Swagger document. Are you familiar with Swagger? Okay, Swagger is a format. So original web services were like SOAP, right? And let's not talk about XML RPC. That's a whole different thing, right? But let's just talk about SOAP. So SOAP had a companion, which was WSDL, the WSDL file. And that described all of the methods and parameters in your SOAP API. Very handy. You could take a WSDL file and kind of auto-generate a client. REST has not had that. REST has SOAP was XML, is a very specific type of XML use. REST is kind of the Wild West, right? So there were some competing standards that kind of spun up. Most of them failed because they tried to be too much like SOAP and WSDL. Swagger, API Blueprint, RAML, those have all been popping up. And again, we go back to the competing standards, which is wonderful. But Swagger is actually a JSON formatted documentation of your API. And the Swagger project provides a bunch of a bunch of code hooks that people can put in their code, and it'll help auto-generate the Swagger document for them. And then they have tools that'll take the Swagger JSON and convert it to a documentation file or a little web page so people can navigate through and see it. Very handy, as opposed to just like a Word doc that got written once to describe the API and has never been updated to keep up with the code, right? Swagger helps with that. I'm just saying Swagger because the API Blueprint is trying to do all the same things, but I'm just using Swagger as the example set. But if you get your APIs documented in these formats, now we have something possible, and so we can start testing that way. So if you haven't checked out Swagger and you're dealing with REST APIs, start checking it out. It is a great way to get documentation so that then security testing can be possible, because now we can handle the discovery. Because even if you manually sit here and navigate through this mobile app and you record a bunch of traffic and now you see what those calls are, that doesn't mean that's all the API calls. There could be a whole bunch more that you just didn't hit, right? So if you have a Swagger description of your API, now you have something much more powerful to test with. And I see going forward, you'll start to see that in the tools. I know we're adding it to ours. I imagine other people are going to copy that effort because it's really the smart way to do it. So I would certainly encourage that effort on any of the development teams you're dealing with, is get them to do Swagger documentation of their formats. So we're ending a little early. I went a little fast. But hopefully I got a lot of time for questions we can kind of talk about. But really the goal here was to just kind of get everybody to be aware of Hackazon. Go check it out. Code's available. You can download it. You can use our hosted version. Go play with it. It's great for teaching as well as testing your tools, but it's a great teaching tool because even for yourself, I've had a lot of people that had never had an opportunity to test these type of functions because they were worried about testing production or whatever. And so it's a great tool for that. So feel free to go at it. All of the information, these slides will be posted, but you're certainly able to reach out to me or just get on GitHub. And we recently moved it to the Rapid7 section within GitHub. There's a lot of Rapid7 projects, right? For those that are familiar on the network side, there's like Metasploitable. So we almost renamed Hackazon, but I didn't like Websploitable. It was just too much. So we kept it at Hackazon. And legal had to approve, it took a while. But anyway, feel free to get on there. And these slides will be public. And I think there's links to it from Man vs. Web App. That's my blog. And that's where the podcasting is going to get restarted here in a few weeks. So we'll be talking a lot about this on the podcast and these sort of problem sets. But the question is around the logging on the back end. So could somebody on the defensive side detect that these attacks are happening? And currently with the PHP code base, there's not really that much. We would, because you generate a lot of errors and stuff like that. We actually were talking with, I don't know if those guys are here, Previty. You guys familiar with Previty at all? They do RASP, real-time application security protection. And the check marks, I think they're coming out with theirs too. But we've been actually kind of contemplating writing a new version of it in Java, at least the back end. We'll probably have everything else the same, all the same APIs and all that stuff. But we're thinking about building a new back end in Java, because then tools like that are defensive in nature, that are good at testing Java or .NET. We hadn't decided which one it will do it in, but it'll be one of those two. But then tools like a RASP tool that's intended for that defensive purpose attached to code, they would be able to start picking up on this. And certainly, you can obviously always put a WAF in front of it, and the WAF will, in many cases, will at least see the attacks, if not defend. But you can actually see it through more of a WAF, but that would kind of be an add-on. In our code, we don't really have much logging that's going on. There's like a config file that starts everything, so you can always add into that so that there's a token all the time. Or I guess give me the use case there. Oh. That's interesting, to record which ones actually got hit. So we've been playing with some of that. Obviously, detecting if an attack came in that would work kind of gets iffy at times. All right, well, hopefully this was a useful use of your time, and if you're interested in playing with Hackazon, or any AppSec conversation you want to have with me, you're welcome to it. But thank you all for your time.